not sure that it specifically gets into enhancing per se. It talks about, so it talks about in the beginning, each lot shall connect to an improved water system with a connection to a public water service being required unless waived by the Board of Supervisors. So that last part is new language. So again, it just kind of gives the board, an opportunity if, let's say, the room is filled with people and there's concerns, it actually gives them a little teeth to actually maybe have some influence.
But does that also mean that to override, if they make a recommendation and y'all want to override that, that's not necessarily beneficial to the community? Is that, maybe I'm misunderstanding how we want this.
Well, the board cannot override. The DRBC regs are the bedrock. They're the foundation.
Okay.
What the board can do is improvements beyond that, enhancing it for the safety and protection of the town.
So instead of a quarter mile, half mile?
The DRBC is going to say, you have to do this, and the board has some additional enhanced capabilities there. So they're not overriding the DRBC.
Okay.
And improvements in section A, that's the wording I'm looking for the supervisors to improve. I think it's as they protect the residents and look out for the residents.
In section A of the,
They're talking about the supervisors
right,
and not, I didn't hear based off of any reports, based off of any, they just that they could make a decision. And I think that we need to take a look at.
so you're saying clarify the language in A,
Yes.
that we're not overriding the regional
I have no
authority.
problem with supervisors saying no. I really don't, because they're out here for the residents, that's their job.
Right,
I have no problem with that.
sure.
But being based off of a report, being based off of expertise, working with experts, was the language I didn't hear in section A.
Got it.
Does that make any sense?
It does, yeah.
I've got a question for the pump down test I do. What time of the year is that being performed?
Can you speak
Spring,
up,
the
please?
summer?
Yeah, we're getting, if you come up to and introduce yourself, I know Gar, so it's.
Hi, my name's Jim Miller. I live just right down the road. And I just had a question about the pump down test. What time of the year would that be performed? The spring, the summer, the fall?
It doesn't specify, the regs don't specifically specify, but they have to look at, when they calculate, there's a water balance, and they have to look at what's the recharge and what's the low flow recharge based upon the base flow in a stream to determine the amount they're going to propose to take out. Are they less than that minimum recharge that occurs? So that's part of the mass balance that has to be done. But the pumping test, they don't specify what time of year, but there are other things taken into consideration with that. So if you're like here in the spring when the groundwater levels are at their highest, before the evapotranspiration really gets going, then that's going to be looked at more carefully than if you've got one in the fall when the groundwater elevations are at their lowest levels.
That's what I would be concerned about.
Yeah, they look at worst case. And also even when the pumping test is being done, they make sure something like you're pumping out of a well here, where you're discharging that water, you can't discharge it close to the well because then you could be enhancing your own, results. So there's a lot looked at carefully on that.
Do you all have an idea where the aquifer level currently is?
The depth of groundwater, well, there's typically a water table, there's a perch zone on top of the bedrock because the shales around here weather to a real nice clay. And then the groundwater beneath that is the actual true water table. It could be anywhere from 10, 20 feet down, depending upon where you are at with the elevation. The water table typically somewhat mirrors the topographic features. So if you're on the top of the hill, it might be a little deeper to the groundwater. If you're down by the creek, then you're probably pretty close.
Yeah, as I say, would your draw down test be next to Swamp Creek, or would it be?
No, they have to be where they're placing those wells for the system.
All right,
So.
all right, very good, thank you.
Introduce yourself.
My apologies, I'm John Webb, everybody knows me as Gar, just so that for the record, my apologies.
Okay, thank you.
So, John, can I just follow up with you on your
Yes, please.
comment? So in A, you're looking for some sort of statement that would essentially kind of require professionals to be giving the supervisors guidance, is that?
Guidance is good, yes. Yep, and for the supervisors to be able to work with improvements and recommendations for the citizens, for the residents of
Rick Buckman, Chairman of the Planning Commission. And just want to point out, I think the real benefit to this ordinance is the fact that you're going over and above on the testing of the DRBC by going to 50% of the top capacity of the development and pumping for 72 hours, 24, you're more likely to root out any problems. And, you know, if the reports don't come back from the professionals during that 72 hours to the liking of the township, it gives the supervisors ammunition to turn the development down at that point. So I think that was our motivation in doing this.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Mr. Hatcher, I do have one question. You said you live in the area?
Yes, sir.
You said something about 100 feet where they're currently live?
Yeah, if there's, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I don't want to take too much of your time with anybody else. I just want, because
Yeah,
it sounds like you are concerned.
So my concern is, I live right up the road here, my next door neighbor right here. There's a proposed development going in behind my house on a bunch of land that we bought this land just because the ruralness of where it's at. Maybe I'll tell from my accent, I'm not from up here, I'm originally from the south, I like rural areas. Having 80-something houses, potentially, as Grapevine has it, going to be proposed to build behind my house, I live on top of a hill, okay? And this is me down in the valley. So Jim was asking about the water tables and stuff. We're going to be impacted early. We're at the top of that water table. I don't know how well up Big Wells is. I just don't. Sure, we've only been here 5 years. So that was my concern. If there's going to be development put in just right up here between, was it Hopkinsville and Big Road, I live right there pretty much on the corner. And if there's development put in back there, then I'm afraid that when somebody takes a glass of water, it's going to be my last kid's clean glass of water. That's why I'm here today. That's it. So that I just a little bit right up there.
Thank you.
Rick, do you comment on that
Sure.
scenario?
Yeah, again, being at the top of the hill, your well's probably a little bit deeper. And one of the things that we encounter everywhere is a lot of people still have old, shallow wells. When the farms were built, they were hand-dug wells. With an old farm well at our house is 40 feet deep. I wouldn't drink that water. There's probably bacteria. You want deeper water, you want a deeper well. Typically in the Brunswick shale that's present around here, wells are on average about 300 feet deep. So in some cases, if somebody has a really shallow well, you want to check that on your own. And also, just a side recommendation, everybody, it's good to get your own water tested every few years just to make sure you don't have bacteria or other things. In the formations around here, because where the diabase, the igneous rocks come through, a lot of cases there's naturally occurring arsenic, lead, and other things. So it's always good to check them. They weren't put there by man or anything. They were put there by God, but they are present. So it's always good to check your quality. But part of the test does require looking at the wells in the area. There are setback requirements also, just kind of like there are setback requirements. You can't have a well within 100 foot of a septic system. They have setback requirements for where they place their wells, and they have to look at, one, where do they think they're going to get their best yields. That's why what they did is a fracture trace analysis. They look at aerial photos, see where the natural fractures are in the rock, and you get your best yields where those fractures intersect because the rock's a little more broken up there. But it might mean if there's a well over here that's your house and the fractures are running this way, they might pump it and they may not affect yours, but they might affect the guy out here. And that's why typically when the pumping test is done, the DRBC requires that wells be monitored around a variety of different directions just to make sure there isn't a preferential pathway and somebody getting a greater impact.
And just a quick follow-up, sorry. But so you mentioned that it should be up to the homeowner to determine their well and all that stuff. If the development is going to come in and potentially impact this, should it not be up to them for the continuous monitoring? And what if there is something that maybe I have an overwell? No fault of mine, I'm having to replace a well because of whatever reason it may be.
And that's part
should
of
that be up to be out of my pocket versus the development that's coming in that has the money to build development first?
And that's what's in the DRBC regs, that if they would do something that impacts your well, they have legal obligations to make you whole.
Okay, so, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hopefully this one is
Is there any place that you can get your water tested for free? It used to be able to take it to Montgomery County Park and have it tested.
I haven't heard much anything with that Suburban Testing Labs. It's out in Reading. They do a lot of, no, it's not free. But if you get like bacteria done, I think it's about $15. You know, you could spend a few hundred if you get a wide range of things. But, you know, the typical things to look at would be, the bacteria is probably the most prevalent things. I mean, we almost bought a house up in Hoppenville, and it had a well in the basement. And the guy said, oh, it's okay, I chlorinated it. So how do you determine how much chlorine to use? And he said, well, I figured if a little was good, I just turned it all the way up. So not realizing that the impact of the chlorine can be just as bad as the bacteria. And that there are other methods. But there are a number of laboratories around, but I'm not aware of any free places that'll do it.
I know our well's only 100 feet.
Okay. Got it.
So if they put this development in, who knows what'll happen to our well.
And if you're close by, that's one of the things they look at. That's what this ordinance pushes, is having them ask all the residents around, do you want your well monitored? Because I've worked on projects before where some people say, I don't want you near my well. And other people are like, yeah, I want to know what's going to happen to my well. Because what they'll do is they'll put a pressure transducer, just a little probe and a wire down in the well, and that measures fluctuations while they're pumping. And as the ordinance requires, there's a requirement before the pumping test starts, they have to monitor what's called static conditions, where they're not pumping, because there could be other fluctuations from other pumping sources, or just, you know, changes in the aquifer itself. So they monitor that first to see, okay, what's the background conditions? And then they pump it, and then that way they can look and compare that to see, okay, did there anything change here during the pumping that wasn't already occurring during the non-pumping period?
Yeah. See, we have a problem too with our well, because ours is buried underground.
Okay.
It's not above ground.
Yeah,
The cap's below ground.
it's good if you get a chance to have that dug up, have a well driller come out, weld a casing on it. My parents' well was below grade. They had a bacteria problem. We got the casing extended up, shocked it with chlorine, tested it. They never had another problem. Because when it's buried, your well seal can go bad, and then you get surface water seeping.
I know, because when we moved in, we had that problem.
Yeah,
They
and
had-
it's not
they had
expensive
put
to get it extended above grade, which then protects you for the long term. And all new wells are required to be above grade.
Yeah, I know, all the new wells are.
Sir, your name?
Dave Hoffman,
And you're from?
Colonial Road, American.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Other public?
Foundry water supply in Red Hill, I think they do free water testing. I think so, I think it had it done there. It's called
In Red
Data.
Hi, Lisa Fisher, Southford Station Road, and I have two questions. One is when the wells are finished being constructed, who technically owns that?
I believe it will be the township ultimately, right?
Yes, once they dedicate the water system, the township will then own the wells, and they would have control over the water system. The developer would not maintain that.
Okay, so then the township will have responsibility for maintaining it, as well as who is responsible for the inspection of the fire hydrants?
Well,
And-
go ahead.
Oh, any water system has to have a licensed operator, and licensed operators, there are certain requirements of what needs to be met, and including looking at the well heads, checking things, hydrants, valves, the gamut of things, and the township can delegate what tasks are done by who. If, say, the road crew was going to do something, you know, flushing hydrants or whatever, that could be up to the township, but there are requirements.
There are
Yeah.
requirements for the fire hydrants?
Well,
Inspection.
so I think maybe where you're going with this is our current development
Yeah.
has substandard water pressure at the hydrants, and we've made sure that going forward, any new development would have to meet current firefighting requirements for the hydrants. So I think we've made sure that the code requires that at this point.
And that development met the requirement at the time, but times changed, and the hydrants over there performed for what they were designed to do, But it's a matter of, like, the next step is the township is looking at how to possibly improve that.
And that includes inspection, periodic inspection? 'Cause there
Yes.
seems to be some requirements for Montco or the state for periodic fire hydrant inspections. And I'm just wondering,
So when you say inspections, are you meaning?
like annual inspections to make sure that they're functioning properly?
So I think that's the flushing.
Yeah, when they
Right,
get
so-
flushed, the
go
key
ahead.
thing to go wrong is the valves on there, on the hydrant, or if something comes loose. So when they're flushed, that's typically when those things would be identified.
Okay, so
Yeah,
with
so
the
typically.
new development will have Upper Frederick's responsibility to maintain those and maintain any type of inspections and.
Right, and as Rick says, you know, the township may choose to hire contractors to run the plans for us, and just like we do at Perkins Crossing. So we flush the hydrants now twice a year at Perkins Crossing, and it's actually, the next one's scheduled May 16th. So, and we have our road crew actually goes out and flushes them now.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Other public comments? Anybody else?
Good evening. I'm Steve Lampman. I work with Sal Appio Homes. And I just wanted to confirm or question a couple comments on the ordinance that's proposed. It appears that in section A, it talks about that any connection to a water system whether operated by the township or not shall be approved by the Board of Supervisors. Are there other alternatives? I mean, if we have a will serve letter from a public water authority, what other option does a developer have?
Are you referring to the property next to Ivy Ridge?
Yes, or any.
Okay. I mean, my understanding is that property is grandfathered to be able to tie into that existing public water system that's not controlled by the township. So I'm not sure that that would fall under this. I'm not sure if either Ken or Rick have comments on that.
Yeah, I mean, that parcel was already designated to be part of that, and I
Right.
guess those
Yeah, I
capacity
think we
established.
determined that one's already grandfathered in to be able to tie into that public water. But I believe the board's feeling is that the extension of that public water source, they would not secure beyond that development. If I understand your past actions correctly.
That's accurate.
Thank you. For any other location within the township, if we have a will serve letter from an acknowledged public authority, it appears that that could be not approved by the Board of Supervisors, so I'm asking what other option would there be if we have a will serve letter?
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with this. What is this, you said will serve?
So
Will serve letter.
an existing water system is saying if they want, they would provide water to a proposed development. But may I say something else? Or
Yeah.
the primary thing with the ordinance, it gives the Board of Supervisors control, so that if you're going to plan a development, maybe there is an option to hook up to another water system, and they might say, okay, that's fine, but based upon the circumstances and the situation, there may be a problem, and at least the township's got control over what's happening with water service in the township, so that they might say, no, you need to do a separate system or connect into one that the township already has, depending upon location, conditions. You know, it's not, there's too many hypotheticals to say, but it just gives the board control to provide some input on that.
But Rick, I think to his question, the alternative would be he would have to drill a well for his
Yeah,
own
it
development.
might be an individual wells there, or you might have, all right, it might be a case that, yeah, you might have to add, install wells that cover that development, and then maybe it gets interconnected with another development, or it's just a standalone, kind of like Ivy Ridge or Kirk Crossing.
Okay, thank you. believe if I'm watching the identifiers scrolling down the page, page 8, letter B, if I understand the sequencing correctly, even if we have a will serve letter to a acknowledged public authority like Aqua or Pennsylvania American Order of People, you are requiring a bond for public water?
Well, I suppose, I mean, that's kind of a unique situation, right? So in that case, you could always request a waiver and justify that if you're connecting into an existing public system, you would not be impacting surrounding wells, right? So it would seem that that would be a justifiable waiver request. Is that?
And one other thing, if you may be connecting into an existing system, but they might be in a scenario where they need to add additional wells in the area to supply that, but still with the interconnection, so that could have an impact.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Any other public comments? Comments, questions? All right. So, based on this conversation here, the comments that we've received, I think item A, we want to update some of the verbiage here based on Mr. Webb's comments.
Yes, we consider that a minor change or edit. And if you have a copy and you're following along in section 1, paragraph, subparagraph A, I'll read the full sentence. It says, any connection to a water system, whether operated by the township or not, shall be approved by the Board of Supervisors. And if I understood you, we would just add the words, approved by the Board of Supervisors, upon considering the recommendations of the township professionals and/or consultants. Because that's what they were doing.
Exactly. It wasn't there. It allows the experts to go in to help you guys, help council supervisors make a decision.
Right. So, I mean, with my view on what we have here in front of us, it helps protect the land, right? It puts more stringent requirements on what has to happen for somebody to come in and put it in development, protects wells, protects the property owner. Is there, I'm going to throw it out there, does anybody not understand that, or is anybody in disagreement about that? What do you think?